I always say, I would say this is like a piece of advice to people looking back is be hungry, humble, and kind and willing to learn.
Doesn't have to be
Okay.
perfect. Come on, engineer. It can be
Okay.
suboptimal, you know.
It's like you know me. I'm such a perfectionist. I'm actually going to say Daniel Ricciardo, and this is rooted in the fact that he almost ran me over on a scooter in Austin, Texas. I was on crutches for the rest of the weekend, which kind of sucked, but it was really, really still fun. I had a great time, and I was taken very well care of by the Red Bull team who I was there with, and then Aston Martin after I did get hurt. And then even like I was at like one of the parties on crutches, like nothing was stopping me that weekend. So
Wow.
not broken, badly sprained, but it was, like, really funny that they were like, "Yeah, we saw the drivers," and I'm like, "You're not helping me."
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Georgie's Stripping the Dipping podcast. I'm your host, F1 Blag. And today's guest, Molly Oxner, is one of those people who can do just about anything. Molly started watching NASCAR in 2014, and little did the then engineering student know that a decade later she'd be working in the sport. But trust Molly not to take the traditional path. Before joining McLaren's NASCAR Cup team this season, she was already an established TechToker and had launched 2 podcasts. I know you'll love this episode, so let's get to it. Molly, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm super excited to be here and chat all things F1 and motorsport, and super
Oh my
excited to
God.
meet y'all and get into it.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so much to chat about when it comes to motorsport. But before we
Yes.
dive into that and your various pursuits, I'm interested to know a bit about you in terms of how, if you were meeting someone for the first time, how would you introduce yourself?
I am a motorsports field application engineer supporting mainly NASCAR, but then I also founded and hosted I founded and run the largest and only female-run motorsports technical education TikTok page and host a podcast in my free time on motorsports as well. That's like the elevator pitch.
No, well, I know, and you struggled to fit it all into the elevator, right? We're now
Oh,
out of the
yes,
elevator, we're in the boardroom. Exactly.
you
No, but it's
probably would
impressive.
be.
No, it's extremely impressive. So, where would you say your passion for motorsport comes from? Sort of, what's your first memory of really falling in love with the sport?
It's kind of funny actually because it's a lot of the reason certain women, especially in the sport, especially fans, get crap for from other fans. But had I not found motorsports the way that I did, I wouldn't be here talking to you. So kind of my earliest memories, motorsport was kind of always around. I'm from Detroit, which is the Motor City. One of my relatives is a really big NASCAR racing fan, but never really piqued my interest. I liked cars, thought cars were cool. Earliest memory of a car for me was a Ferrari. It's kind of like the kid draws a red car kind of thing, and it's a Ferrari. However, I didn't really find racing until I was in engineering school. I was kind of piqued to go into engineering by some EVs and hybrids and kind of the next generation of the automotive industry. Never really thought motorsports would be my thing. I don't know if BuzzFeed was as big as it is for you guys, but in the heyday of BuzzFeed, there was like these 25 reasons why this is really hot or this is the coolest, whatever, right? I see this article that said 25 reasons why NASCAR drivers are the hottest athletes, and I clicked on it and wind up being like, oh yeah, that guy's kind of good looking. And then go and ask some friends that I'm living with about who this person is. And turns out it's Dale Earnhardt Jr., NASCAR royalty. They tell me I have to watch the race with them that weekend, which is the 2020 or 2024. Geez, words are hard today. 2014 Daytona
Mm.
500 that he wins. And then I proceed to fall in love with motorsports, need to understand why the cars turn left, how they do it so fast, how they can do it for so many laps, and then proceeded to kind of just accumulate motorsports along the way. So, like my first Formula One champion was Sebastian Vettel. I picked up WEC and IMSA and IndyCar kind of along the way there, and then it kind of became this huge part of my life. And I still was like, I have no idea how to make a career out of this, but I'm super into it and I love it. And that's kind of how I got involved. And then 2020, 2021-ish, I was constantly explaining race cars to my friends. I'm the engineer who knows a lot about race cars and answers those questions for her friends. And I just started recording conversations I had. and putting them online, which has brought me here into like the content and podcasting space. And then it also helped me transition my professional career to the motorsports world. But that's ironically, I thought a race car driver was hot, and that would have never brought me here had I not seen that article.
So we have something to praise BuzzFeed for, and yes, it was
Yes.
relatively large here. Although the sad thing about, I guess, that second generation of, I don't know, was it online journalism, is that it's over
Yeah.
for them.
Yeah.
But what's
It
interesting
is.
is, yeah, you said that you were in engineering school already before you fell in love with
Yes. Yeah,
motorsport.
I
So what
was.
were you
I
going
was
there for?
So I was going for my degree in mechanical engineering, which is still what I graduated with. But I was really kind of my goal at the time was I want to work on electric vehicles. That's what got me into engineering. That's what really excites me about engineering. Ironically enough, that's what I want to go do. And that is what I did. I graduated and got to do that. I did that for the first 7 years of my career. And in the meantime, motorsports just seemed like this big unattainable boys club, but I was like making my interests known. And I was between year 2 and year 3, to put it in like British terms of when I did find racing. And so it actually became a tool to help me get through school too. I was really struggling with fluid mechanics. For anybody that's not gone to engineering school, that's like the class that aerodynamicists literally their entire existence begins in. And I was really struggling with that class. And I'm at tutoring hours with the professor, and he goes, I know you really like race cars. I'm going to put this into a race car term for you. And we're going to talk about this like it's a race car, right? And see if that helps. And it did, because I was like, wait, I actually get those like terms and I understand that because I've read about it and I know about it from that. And so it actually also became a tool to help me get through engineering classes as well, because I could put it into kind of a form that I understood a little bit better, and it would help me kind of progress through my classes.
No, it makes sense. And what's really interesting is you can hear the energy coming through your passion. And you said, so like 2020, 2021, not necessarily globally a fun time because it was sort of peak COVID, but you were
Yeah.
talking about explaining motorsport to or motor racing to your friends. So what came
Yes.
first? Was it like your professional foray into motorsport from mechanical engineering, or was it the podcast side, or was it the TikTok side, or what? Give us an order
So
here.
the
Yeah.
TikToks, yeah. Okay. So it was the TikTok side that came first. A lot of that, like I said, started from, well, if my friends have questions, especially with like the new Aero set coming into Formula One, other people must have questions. And so I started just making videos on what I was already talking about and like explaining the car launches and what I saw in the new cars with the new ground effect Aero, and was like, there's nobody really doing this like this, and making it understandable, because the tech side of Formula One, especially in motorsports, is very not only gate kept, but it's basically treated at a, if you don't have like a PhD level, why are you asking questions and why are you here learning? And so that was kind of like there was a need there. And so I was like, you know what, we're gonna make this a easy to understand place. And then the TikTok led to the podcasts, which into long form content. And then that all led to my professional career in motorsports. Actually, it was a little self servicing, I would say, because if you actually looked at my resume on paper when I was applying for motorsports jobs, I didn't have anything that would really say I have motorsports experience, but I have all of this tech knowledge, right? I have all this book smarts, and book smarts and industry smarts and street smarts are completely different things in the world, right? However, I was kind of like, how can I not only demonstrate that in something that is like a portfolio almost, but also kind of helps the community, because I saw that the need was there. So it was this tiny bit of self-servicing in my content that was like, I can show somebody that I know my stuff. I can pull up my page and show the engagements and the topics that I'm talking about and breaking down, to show that I actually do have a really good foundation in this sport. And not only do I have that, I have a well established professional network as well through this. And I can show I have kind of a good groundwork laid, and my willingness to learn. And I'm a sponge. I love to learn. So like my willingness to learn, my energy, my passion, my enthusiasm, I have that, and I'm ready to go kind of thing. And I know that I'm not turnkey with certain things, but it's there. And so it actually did help me make the jump professionally, believe it or not. And it's kind of one of those weird statistics of, I'm a fan. I kind of did the content side, and I really was kind of working in it on the content side, and then was able to transition fully with my day job now.
No, incredible. And, I'm sure it's hard work, but it does sound like you're living the dream at the same time. So huge
Yes.
congrats.
Thank
And
you. I'm
uh,
tired.
no, I can imagine. Well, thanks for making time for us and our listeners. I
Of
really
course.
appreciate
No,
it.
I always will. I was so excited for this. I thought I saw it like drop off my calendar by accident and I was just looking at
Mm.
the wrong week, but I was like, "Oh my god, where'd it go?" I was looking so forward to doing this.
Oh, that's lovely. And so, like, you did the tech talks, which I like a good
Mhm.
pun, and you were talking a
Thank
little
you.
bit about like hinting at inclusivity, but gatekeeping. And
Yes.
like a
Yes.
reflection for me is like when I started my career, I studied maths, so I was coming
Okay.
into a new profession, and there were lots of economists there, and I found a lot of
Mhm.
them couldn't explain things, or I was struggling to understand what they were saying.
Yeah.
Something that has generally helped my mental health across my life is to assume incompetence and not malice wherever possible. So, do you think gatekeeping, like, to what degree do you think it is sort of deliberate gatekeeping, and to what degree is it people don't have the empathy to communicate with different audiences effectively?
I think it's a combination of both,
Mm,
especially in the tech community, because especially in kind of the engineering and STEM world, which I think you've probably seen. If you ask someone to explain this to someone like they have no idea, a lot of highly technical folks can't always bridge that gap. So I think that that's not necessarily an incompetence thing. I think it's just they're so used to talking about it every single day at these high levels, they assume everybody else is on the same level. Where so that isn't really like a malice side, but it's just they're so used to like the broadcast doesn't. I find the broadcast really, really guilty of this. They'll get into all of this technical nitty gritty, like Sam or Crofty or Ted will get into something, and I'm like, I know what you're talking about, but my friend sitting next to me doesn't, and I have to now explain it to them. And it's because they talk about it so much. They assume everybody knows about it like they know about it. And so I think that's where part of the like tech side of it, some of it comes from. And I do think that then there's the other side where it is kind of that malicious, like, oh, too many American fans are ruining the sport, like that pedestal that they have, especially with the Formula One world. Other series, I don't feel like it's that way as much, like, not to name names, but I feel like that's where, like, I really was like, I saw it the most. And so I think that there is a little bit of that, is that kind of like elitism in motorsports we talk about in some other spaces, and kind of some of the like, oh, we're better than everybody kind of mentality. And so when new fans want to come in and learn, people are like, we don't want to, kind of thing. And so that's where I kind of try to break that down and make it more open. But that's kind of where I see it, is there's kind of the two facets, and one's kind of fully unintentional. And then there's the other side that is a little bit more like, oh, you want to come learn about this sport, but you don't understand this or that. Well, you're a terrible fan and this and that, kind of perpetuating that. And then it makes people not want to ask questions and not want to dig deeper into it, and kind of not want to learn as much because they're kind of met with some hostility when they go to ask.
and maybe incompetence wasn't the right word for me, but because I guess they're hyper competent, but then maybe in the kind of art of or the skill of communication,
Mhm.
they haven't
Yeah.
they've lost track, I guess, of their audience.
Mhm.
So what was interesting that you said there was, I suppose you talked about communicating and reaching people of different
Mhm.
technical abilities, but then you also
Yeah.
talked about the American audience. So
Yes.
Formula One, clearly, the purchase by Liberty Media of
Mhm.
the commercial rights Formula One. It's a big play on trying to expand the sport globally, but particularly in the US market. What do you
Yes.
think could be done better? Not to steal your intellectual property, because I'm sure you're writing a brief and about to pitch it. But what do you think the simple things are, or the complicated things are that they could do better to really reach that audience?
I think for me, I see it as one kind of, there's like this big topic, I call it like barrier of entry to the sport. And I've talked about this numerous places. So you're not stealing any I've hear anything. It's been, I've talked about it so many places, but the barrier of entry to the sport, that's financially, like the broadcast level, with like the way things are communicated, all of that. If you go look at some of the other series like IMSA and WEC from the knowledge side, they have like a 101 level that's accessible on their own series website. So if you're curious, you can go and get that foundation immediately for free. And then their broadcasts go and do this fantastic job of, if you can just even catch a clip on social media, or even like I said on the broadcast, they do such a good job of saying, well, we're talking about this and this is what that is. And NASCAR has actually gone the extra step if we're going to talk about other American motorsport series, and they have what's called the cutaway car. And it is a full 3D animated car that they will say, well, we're talking about this on the car. They will pull it up on the broadcast in real time, pull body panels away from this model of the car, point to it, and show you everything that like you need to know then and there in that moment. And then you get into obviously the cost side when it gets into like barrier of entry, where we're seeing the price of grandstand and GA tickets and all of this stuff becoming higher and higher and higher and higher, where you have all of this interest and demand, and you kind of know they're going to pay that because they want it. But what does that get you? I think I spent more in 2022 on my 3-day grandstand ticket for Circuit of the Americas than I did for every other race I went to that year combined, and I did like 5 or 6 races that year across multiple series. So I think that there's kind of a twofold. You need to not only have a lower barrier of entry of cost, but I think you also need to lower the barrier of entry from just even a socials and knowledge kind of standpoint, because you have the teams doing all of this great stuff. But like if I were a fan and I had no clue what I was getting into and I was like, this is really cool, where is some of that stuff? And Drive to Survive did some of that, but there's not really like a true kind of I can type in their website and I can find stuff like that easily accessible, if that makes sense.
No, it makes a lot of sense, and not to necessarily offend Formula One, but it wasn't that long ago that it was really difficult to Google the start time of a Grand Prix, like to the extent that
Really?
someone created an app, and then eventually, like Formula One, were like, "Yeah, okay, this is stupid. We need to do a better job." So I
Hmm.
think maybe it's a mindset thing of like whether they think they have an elite product that they don't need to cater to the audience, and maybe it's shifting
Yeah, and
now.
that's
Yeah.
I've talked about this on one of my other podcasts, Engines, EVs, and Espresso. We talked about how hard it is to sometimes look outside of your bubble. We'll say like the different series, and like stuff like that. For like that blows my mind that you couldn't find a start time because that's so easy with all these other series that I kind of pay attention to, right? But it's like, wow, that's like such a simple thing. And had they noticed, maybe that wouldn't have ever been like a pain point, you know? Like I use this example. I was talking about something called a tire dragon, which is basically just a tool that NASCAR and IndyCar use where they drag tires behind a vehicle on a racetrack to lay rubber down in the racing line to help with grip, essentially because the tires on the track are like a cheese grater. I had a engineer reach out to me from a championship winning Formula E team at the time and ask if I could give them more information on that specific piece of technology because that would be something that would be really, really helpful in Formula E. And it blew my mind. And I think that Formula One, maybe some of these pain points, they think that they're listening to fans and they think they're looking outside of their bubble, and maybe they're not. And they're just kind of going along because they see their numbers are up and they're doing these profits and they're getting all of this viewership. But there's some kind of things that need to be fixed, exactly kind of like what you're saying.
Get me started about their bubble because I'll be here all night ranting about the
Oh
FIA and
no.
elitism. No, careful. No, before we talk about engines, EVs, and espresso, because I also love espresso.
Yes.
So before we do that,
Oh,
yeah, I know, right? Incredible. I feel like we're going to have to talk about it. But look, before we
yes.
do that, this point about understanding their fans, I suppose
Yeah.
to be polite, once you get into the F1 paddock and the F1 circuit, and you're traveling around the world and you've got 24 dates or 24 collections of dates you've got to
Mhm.
make, it might be difficult to then sort of put
It
yourself in the
is.
shoes of a ordinary civilian like myself. I don't
Mhm.
know. What do you think?
Yeah, and even I'm in the NASCAR Cup world, and for reference, they do 36 races in 39 weeks in a typical season, and I'm on a rotation schedule right now, so I'm not on every weekend, but I already am like, "Wow." I'm like, "With that what's going on? Wait, huh?" Like, I kind of see how it would be hard on a straight 24 race. That's all you have to, like you have to get to those dates kind of things, you have to get to the grid. I can see it, but at the same time, it's like, as much as you're traveling or you're scrolling on your phone, you don't see some of these things. It's kind of like the counter argument, right? But I can definitely see how hard it is to get out of the bubble. But then from a like empathy interviewing and design thinking standpoint, they send out all of these surveys, and there's all of these opportunities for feedback for fans, and they look at their interactions on socials, obviously. And it's just kind of one of those, it's hard to understand how we're still having some of the problems that we're having with all of the avenues that the series does try to have. And is it just is it a volume thing? You don't have enough personnel? Is it a like there's so much feedback, you don't know where to start? And then the bubble, are you just so overloaded, you don't get a chance kind of thing? And I feel like there's so many low-hanging fruits that the FIA and some of these series could go for, but likely a byproduct of the chaos of their bubble, they might not ever get to.
I mean, look, maybe now I've swung the conversation too far in the wrong direction, and we're all making excuses for them. But going, no, we're right to be
You're fine.
balanced. But like going to the very basics here, right? And if let's say
Yeah.
the viewership has gone up, but growth is slowing. Let's say that the
Yes.
commercial revenues are going up, but will they always go up? Doesn't it always just boil down to how entertaining the on-track product is? And maybe it doesn't always, but what I
Mm.
mean is, if the on-track product was fantastic and the commentators were sort of effusive in their sort of energy about
Mhm.
describing all of that, would the tech kind of knowledge and the barrier to entry be as important, given that F1 is frankly not very competitive at the moment? What do you think about that?
I think we see it in IMSA. I think that IMSA is a prime counter argument to that, that the on-track product is fantastic. The barrier to entry and cost is very low. The announcers are really exciting and they're doing it well. And it's kind of one of those where it's like I can get full access in a weekend much cheaper for a fraction of a Formula One ticket's price. I'm in the garage, I'm in the pit lane, whatever, right? I feel like there is going to come a point where can you justify the on-track product for the price? I always use IMS as a great example because the cost is so low and it blows my mind for the great racing you're getting. And it's one of those things we saw it. I personally believe we saw it happen with NASCAR in the early 2000s, where the on track product became so terrible, you couldn't justify the price. It was one of those things where they were kind of not delivering on track and the bubble burst. And so I think that there could come a point where the bubble could burst in Formula One, and maybe I'm missing the point of your conversation, but I think that that's where the barrier of entry. I struggle because knowing the like business side, they're just going to want to keep milking that popularity. If the on-track product gets better, I think they would raise the prices actually. I think it would reverse the problem. It would make the problem worse basically because they know they have all of this demand clamoring when the on-track product's bad or the on-track product's not that great, which I would actually say I don't believe it is. I think that this reg set has really still got some of the issues we've had in the past, but I think that they would probably just continue to charge if the on-track product is good. And they would be like, well, we've got all this awesome racing and use, I can see it, the big highlight reel of some side-by-side battles and come check it out, you know? And I think that it would just continue to drive, I think, the craze and the price, because if you look at the engagements now with everybody saying the interest is waning with this kind of Red Bull and Max dominance era, but the numbers are still crazy for viewership and engagements. I think if there was competitive on track product, it would probably exasperate the issue.
Agree and amen to everything you said. So we'll talk about the Miami Grand Prix coming up in a bit, and we'll reflect on the China Grand Prix. But before we do that, engines, EVs, and espressos, the high
Yeah.
caffeine, high energy, high vibe podcasts. Tell me why, like, because I love all three of those things, but what brought those together
Yes.
for you?
So what kind of brought all those together is the brainchild of me and one of my very close friends, Abby Rockshit. She is a consultant by day, so she's got this business mind, and she has a really deep automotive background with that. And then I'm technical with my EVs and motorsports and engineering background, and we kind of felt like we brought a very interesting perspective to the space, especially around like why we race and road cars and the business side of okay, there's not road relevancy here. And we talk a lot about that. And so we kind of originally kind of build it as well, it's not your boyfriend's cars and coffee, you know, because it's cars and coffee have gone together for so long. We both love coffee and we wanted to talk about cars of all kind and we love a good alliteration. We came up with engines, EVs, and espresso. So the tagline is the podcast about caffeine, machine, and all things in between. And that's really what it is. We kind of talk about any and everything, and motorsports, automotive, EVs, coffee. We were talking about, like, we always talk about what our favorite drink we've had of the week is, or did we try something adventurous and fun, or a little bit of coffee education, because much like the car world, the coffee world is very kind of male dominated often, and a little bit of an attitude when you try to ask questions. So it's just kind of a fun little offshoot that we came up with that has been an absolute blast. And then I obviously have my other podcast with Dr. Obbs, but that's kind of I have these two. I have the fully tech, and then I have the tech with some coffee, and we can talk about the real industry of automotive and all of that. And so it's super fun.
No, it sounds fun. And you've got to tell me, what is your favorite coffee? Is it a short coffee like an espresso, or is it a longer one like a latte or a flat white? Like, what's your go-to?
It So my go-to usually is either a short, so I'll do just a couple, like, espresso shot pulls, or I'm typically, like, a latte girl. How about you?
Yeah, I'm espresso straight to the veins, and I have to
Okay.
control myself to have it like to stop having it
Yes.
at about 1 o'clock, or I won't sleep.
Oh, yes.
Um,
Yeah, a typical day for me is I'll wake up and I'll pull a short coffee, so I'll have just the espresso while I get ready to leave for work, and then before I leave, I will make a longer coffee, typically an espresso, or not espresso, geez, typically a latte, to take with me to go into the office and have there in the morning. I also am big on the, like, iced coffee train, so I'll do that with the French press usually and have that ready if I want that instead for my air quotes longer coffee, to take in the mornings, but I usually start every day out with just an espresso.
no, nice. And I try to rationalize my addictions. So I heard somewhere that if you hold off having your first coffee for 90 minutes, then it's not terrible because it's something about coffee turning off the receptors in your brain that are telling you you're tired.
Oh,
So you give them the
okay.
chance to realize that you're that awake and it's the morning, and then you have it. But that could be complete rubbish. But I try to live by that. I don't know
Interesting.
why. Yeah.
I'm gonna have to look that up. That sounds super interesting because I actually wonder if that's the same thing with, like, hunger suppression too, and your energy levels as well with the brain. I'm gonna look that up. I'm super curious because I love a good way to rationalize the amount of caffeine I drink in a day because
Yeah, it just
it's
narrows
a
the
lot.
window, right? So then you go, oh well, I
Yes.
could have a squillion coffees between sort of 9 o'clock and one, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, my cutoff's about 2 p.m. before I'm kind of like, I'm gonna be up all night if I have anything other than, like, just a regular, cup of coffee. If I'm having a short espresso, I'm gonna be up all night at that point. So I know when to make my transition at least because I can have a regular, like, cup of coffee and go to bed.
Yeah, I mean, I say one, but one is to then trick my brain into not going beyond two. So, maybe
Yeah.
today I broke that. Who knows? I won't admit it to
It's
myself.
alright. Your secret is safe here if you did.
Exactly, exactly. So it's lovely that you do a podcast with friend of the show, Dr. Obbs, and
Yes.
that you have E Cubed as the kind of is that the proper name or is that
Yes.
just your tag? I don't
That's
know. I love it.
we kind of that's our little tag. We call it E cubed because it's easier to say.
Oh, I love it. I mean, yes, and it helps you remember. Well, for me, remembering the order between engines, EVs, and espressos. So, like, let's segue to you talked about the NASCAR Cup, and while you don't do all
Yes.
36 in 39, um, are you kind of drinking coffee on shift? Like, how arduous is it in a weekend? Talk us through the weekend of
It's not
NASCAR.
it's not terrible. So we follow garage hours, so we're there when the teams are there, and we're a mix of remote and at the track depending on what's going on. So if we're at the track, it's typically a race we can drive to from Charlotte. So that's I sleep in my own bed. I get up, my normal coffee routine, typically get something on our way to the track or at the track, and I caffeinate that way. The travel races, depending, kind of similar routine. We'll stop somewhere, get coffee. I love to find local coffee when I travel. So I was just in Richmond for a race and had done my research on where to go for coffee and checked out a few places while we were there. But it does get a little kind of arduous when we get into the other time zones and we're on remote. So I had a race where I was actually on until about 9:30, 10 p.m. my time because it was a West Coast race. So it was a race where they were 3 hours behind and I was here in Charlotte. So it did get pretty arduous. So I was making a coffee about 5:30 and knowing I shouldn't have done it, but I needed it because I was sitting there doing my work because you adjust your work hours accordingly, working on my regular work, and that was like my lunchtime. So I always have a coffee usually around or right after lunch, and it does get a little arduous, and it's just kind of you adjust accordingly, I would say. But then the fun part too is there's so many energy drink sponsors in the series that you can just walk around the paddock and walk around the garage area and the pit lane, and there are just you can grab them. 'em, they're free. If you're there, they're sponsors, and they're there for you to kind of engage with the product and enjoy it, and so there's, like, Celsius and NOS and Mass and Monster and C4, and all of these companies have their displays out, and you can go grab one and help keep the energy up. So there's no shortage, I would say, of coffee and energy when you're at the track. And I know that there are a few people who really care about their coffee. So on their haulers, they will have a nice setup and they will have good coffee. I know specifically in like the IMSA series, the Chip Ganassi team, that's like the place to go for good coffee if you're in the IMSA paddock. But I know that it's a big culture within some of the racing paddocks as well. I haven't figured out who's got the good coffee yet in the NASCAR kind of garage yet, but I think that there's definitely plenty to be had if you are kind of struggling.
It sounds like you've sussed out like who, well, you can get free caffeine, but also who's got the right caffeine. So that's uh,
Yes.
that's interesting. On energy drinks, I haven't quite sort of forayed into that. Obviously, Red Bull was much bigger about 10, 15 years ago when I was at university, and we
Yes.
mixed it with a variety of other
Oh,
liquid
yes. Oh,
drinks.
yes. Who didn't?
Indeed, indeed. On things like Monster, I'm trying to steer clear because I think it's a slippery slope. So at the moment, I only
It is.
associate Monster with people drinking it at like 7 o'clock on the London Underground, and I think, oh no, I
Oh
can't.
my god, yeah.
So I try not to. But there we are.
Yeah. Yeah, that's all I've reignited my enjoyment from them being in kind of the garages and stuff. I in college, it was either you were Monster or Red Bull, and I was Red Bull to mix with numerous other things, and then
Mhm.
Monster if I needed to stay up and get something done, and haven't really touched them much, but they're there. I'm tired. It's gonna be a long day. I'll go grab one and enjoy it. And so it's kind of brought a little bit of the like, I could drink these back. It's definitely a slippery slope. I would definitely agree. And I try to be mindful of that because I will get to the track and I've already had two coffees and then I grab a monster and that's like enough caffeine to kill a horse, right? So I have to be very mindful because then I'm overloading it on caffeine and nobody likes that and that's not a good feeling.
No, well, tell us about the feeling you get when you do your job because you're a field application engineer, according to
Yes.
LinkedIn, which is where I do a
Air
lot of my
quotes,
research.
yeah.
So, like, what does that mean in practice? What are you doing for us lay audience members here?
So my day job basically is that our customers have our products in their cars, and I am there with the team I work on. We make sure that our products are working. If they are not working, why are they not working? And we fix them while also working on developing the next generation and what's coming next and what do the series need to make the products work even better or meet the needs of what kind of the cars have become. And so our products are in every pretty much racing series in the world. So I basically am a little bit of like a helper, and then also I get to go play and create things where I'm like, hey, this would actually be really cool if we could do this, and include it for the teams and include it in what we need. And so I get to kind of make some stuff that goes on cars, or if there's problems, fix them, or we want to try this and we do that and then put it onto the car and get to do it. So it's a little bit of everything, which is really fun. But at its base, the field level of it is like there's stuff on the racetrack. The application is my parts on the car. So how they work on the car, are they functional? What's coming next? Do we need like it's everything with that, like the actual application. Will it work on a cup car kind of thing? And then the engineer side is the engineer, but it's a lot of that and it's super fun because it's a lot of I can choose my own adventure outside of the like support side of it where we're on the track or we're remote supporting our teams who are racing every weekend, but there's a lot of I see something and I can go play and work on developing something, or hey, I noticed this is a problem and I want to fix it. I can do that. So it's really really fun.
It sounds fun, and you can hear the engineering mindset coming through, like trying to explore where there are opportunities to improve things or troubleshoot.
Mhm.
So it sounds fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a lot of like, is it even worth it? You know? It's one of those, like, you think about it in race car terms. I always use this for like cost cap. I'm gonna spend $1,000,000 and it's only gonna get me a half a tenth. Is it really worth that half a tenth? Right. And so it's like,
Mm.
do I spend my time here on a low hanging fruit? Do I kind of roll that into something bigger? It's a lot of triage as well. And that was one of the transferable skills I really felt like I brought, was a good understanding of what should we spend our time on versus like this isn't priority one. And it was kind of cool to see a lot of my regular automotive side skills transfer like they did. And so that's been kind of fun too, is being able to say like, this is the priority, this is maybe, let's get to the grid with this first, because I like, this is hot, and then we can come back and look at this later, which is kind of the stuff I like to do. I'm the chaotic one, and the psychotic one who, when the building's burning, I don't run away from it. I run towards it because I wanna solve it. So it leverages a lot of that weird thing in my brain that loves to do that. Some people see that as a, like, a good thing, and I'm like, "I'm an insane person, but it's fine," in me. So I think it's been such a good mix, and I'm still kind of fresh in the job, but I absolutely love it, and it's been so fun, and it's really kind of brought the things I love about engineering and working in the industry into one, and then it's on race cars.
Yeah. I mean, I can hear the enthusiasm coming through, and you mentioned you're fresh in the job, so
Mhm.
those at McLaren hopefully put your fingers in your ear. But do you have a sense of where you want to go in this profession, or are you seeing how it goes and finding out what you enjoy?
I am still definitely learning what I enjoy. There's a lot of, "Do you wanna sit here and code this, or would you like to do this instead?" And a lot of them learning where I think I will feel best suited versus the needs and everything like that, and it's been really great, and I feel just so well supported, and so that's, even if you are listening, McLaren, I feel so well supported and able to say, "Hey, this isn't working for me," or, "Hey, I want to do this, or I want to kind of pursue this path." I'm given the tools and the ability and kind of the support to do that, which I think has been so fantastic so far. And I think that this is going to be a great kind of spot for me to grow. I still kind of am trying to understand the path and how things kind of work and all of that, but I think that this is a great, like, get in and really start to learn, obviously, because I don't have a lot of the professional motorsports experience like we were talking about. It's a really good opportunity for me to do that and grow from there as I learn kind of the path and where I can take it. But I think that as a whole, so far, the company has been so supportive of me being like, "Hey, I actually think that I would be better suited with this. I can learn. I would love to learn that. I'm always willing to learn." But, like, at the end of the day, it doesn't really get me going, you know? So, like, it's one of those things, but I think that the way that they work and kind of the team and everything, it's just gonna be a great place to grow at and continue to grow.
I can imagine, and yeah, best of luck with that. Something that
Thank you.
no problem. I'm sure you've spoken to many more people in the motorsport community than I have, but interviewing a few of them over the last couple of seasons of this show, you kind of discover that if the downside sometimes is the barrier to entry, the upside is the relationships and the importance of
Mhm.
yeah, building that network that you have within the sport. So I'm sure that
Yes.
that will sort of see you on your way as you sort of progress.
Mhm. Yeah, that's the network is definitely already kind of come in handy, and I think just the network in general, and that's what I always tell people, is networking is the best kind of tool. Even just getting to know people and talking to them and kind of learning about them and the industry and where they come from is such a good tool and such a great thing, and relationships that you can build are fantastic, even if it's not, you don't have a professional goal in mind. It's just one of those things that relationships are so valuable, especially in this industry, and it'll just help you in the end. And I always say, I would say this is like a piece of advice to people looking back, is be hungry, humble, and kind and willing to learn. And that's about others and about yourself and about the space, right? And so I think that the networking and everything is so invaluable.
Be humble, kind, and willing to learn. Yeah, brilliant
Yeah.
values. So, if you don't mind, we'll turn our attention to Formula One. Um,
Sure.
and I have the solution. I have the thing that is going to make Formula One an even bigger deal in the US. Do you want to hear what it is?
Okay. Yes.
Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to take the Ferrari and we're going to paint it blue. And that is what is going to bring in millions more fans. So, at time of recording, the news is broken that Ferrari will paint their car blue for the Miami Grand Prix. So, what is your immediate comment on this, Molly, and how successful do you think it will be?
I'm super intrigued because I actually think that that's a nod to a historic Ferrari
Mm,
that they have run or some sort of testing livery they ran. If I recall correctly, I believe it was for a Monza race. So I'm actually really, really excited to see how they execute that and see what that really is kind of playing into that. I don't do a lot of like, these are my favorite teams and these are my favorite drivers, but I am a Ferrari girly. It's kind of always underneath it all. I am a tifosi, and so I actually do believe that that is a nod to something historic for them because I don't know if this is a milestone year in terms of like what they have, but I do believe that that's kind of like a historic thing.
mm.
So that could be cool. As for how much I think it will help them, I think we're seeing this car has a lot of positives to it versus the previous year. And I think, don't quote me, someone can come yell at me if I do misspeak. There will be some upgrades in Miami. This is where the whole like I'm in my NASCAR bubble is coming in. I'm not super up to speed on the upgrade cadences, but I think they're bringing some stuff. But I think from what we've seen on the other street circuits, this could be a good race for them. Obviously, the RB20 is the car to beat, but with a blue Ferrari, I think anything's possible.
Right, exactly. It's going to bring in the ratings. So, you
Yes.
you are an expert because I all I can do is search, right? So I search Ferrari blue livery. So you said it is it to do with a milestone, or you thought it was? It is. It is Ferrari's 70th
Ah,
anniversary in the US
oh,
marketplace. So 1 point for you. And then the second one is that it says that in 1964, so what would that be? 60 years ago? I don't want to
yeah.
admit my age, right?
60
Yeah, I
exact.
can't believe that's
Yeah,
60. I
60.
remember it was 30 years
Oh
ago.
my
But
god.
apparently, Enzo Ferrari got annoyed with the FIA and handed back Ferrari's racing license. And so the Ferraris were basically entered as privateers for the last two rounds and painted blue. So I think that's where it comes from. So there we are.
That's incredible.
But you kind of knew that. How did you have that in your brain? You kind of had that somewhere like saved.
Bec yeah, that's my brain is so weird. It's like useless random race car information, bar trivia knowledge, and then actual engineering knowledge, which I don't need, apparently just gets thrown out half the time. But I feel like what I've seen at least with Ferrari is they don't act without reason and they don't do something without reason. It's kind of the Italian way, right? They always there's always a reason behind what they do. So when I was like, I'm pretty sure there's a milestone that the cars were blue for some reason
Hmm.
because that's like they'll have blue painted cars for certain promos and stuff. And so I was like, I feel like kind of just put it together of how my mind works. Like that's probably a milestone of some kind if it was blue. Just like there's the iconic yellow, there's the red and the different kind of things. And like there's something with the blue and I couldn't remember what it was. I just knew that there had to be something.
You got it. So let's go back in time and just briefly talk about the
Sure.
China Grand Prix. So three questions, all of which
Sure.
have kind of a key word beginning with an S. So first one, this was the first sprint weekend of the
Yes, it
season.
was.
What's your view broadly on sort of the sprint edition of Formula One weekends, and did this weekend work for you?
So this particular sprint weekend was the first with the changed Parc Fermé rules, and I think for me that was one of the biggest successes, I would say, where the teams are allowed to change the car in between the two qualifying sessions, whereas in the past Parc Fermé happened on Friday for the entire weekend and that was it. For sprint qualifying and your qualifying and the race itself, you were frozen at that point, which then led to the teams prioritizing a race setup versus a sprint race setup. They wanted to put their priority on Sunday. So I actually quite liked this sprint weekend, especially from that standpoint, because then the teams could focus on obviously the wet condition qualifying and the setup for that and cater towards what the conditions would be in the sprint race and then go ahead and make the changes that they needed for qualifying for the actual Sunday race. So I did actually quite like that structure. I think kind of tying into the whole weekend, I don't think the teams thought that the tires were did what they were going to do. And I think that that played into kind of the pace of the sprint race and what happened. George doing the sprint on softs was a huge telltale and a huge learning opportunity, which I thought was super interesting. I was like, there's no way he's going to make it this race on softs. And he did. So it was super fascinating. And I actually quite liked it. And I hope that they do keep that from a like tech and working standpoint for the weekend, because I think that made kind of the sprint to Sunday more successful, in my opinion.
Added another S to the mix, the soft tire. So thank you very much for
Yes.
that. And yeah,
Keeping
I'd
on
not
theme.
I hadn't spotted the Parc Ferme changes. I'd noticed the sort of
Yeah.
order was a bit different. So that's fascinating, and maybe it explains, as you say, why it was more entertaining. And as a sort
Mhm.
of a mere Lewis Hamilton fan, it was good to see him, near the front again for once.
Yes.
So enjoyable.
Yes, it was.
Yeah. Well, the second S is safety. So,
Yes.
unfortunately, Valtteri Bottas, I think he was running quite well. He definitely had a good
He
qualifying,
was.
and his engine, I guess another S, the Sauber, conked out,
Yes.
and he was stuck. Look, why am I saying all these S's? I need to stop. Anyway, look,
It's
he basically.
fantastic.
I know I can't help it now. It's like Tourette's, but he was in the firing line, right? So
Yes.
for me, it felt like a very long time before they brought out the VSC, and we remember that Jules Bianchi, had his sort of near fatal and then ultimately fatal crash under waved yellows when the safety car was out. So, what's your view generally on, I suppose, the approach to safety in Formula One? You obviously have the exposure to NASCAR, and you can see the comparison there. Yeah,
Mhm.
what's your view on that in terms of safety?
So, with, like, the Valtteri Bottas incident, for sure, that should have been immediately thrown because he was out of the car at that point. The car was stricken in an area where it was probably dangerous, and it had another car, had an incident. He was right in that runoff, right? He's in kind of the firing line, as you said. And so that should have been kind of a no questions asked, throw it immediately. And I get the whole you're going to try and give the driver every opportunity to get going, right? Because especially a lot of fans might not know this, especially in Formula One, NASCAR, IndyCar, a lot of these other series, you get out of the car, you're done. There are series where you can get back in. So like NASCAR, you get out of the car, you're required to go have a check at the medical center, but then you can get back in the car. You're not out at that point, as far as I'm aware in the rule book. And so Formula One, you get out of the car during the race, you're done. So I get that we want to try and give the driver every opportunity for them to get going before they have to get out of the car and not throw a caution or like a yellow flag, because that's happened in NASCAR. Sometimes they'll throw the caution and then the car gets going. But it's kind of one of those that really was clear that that was a catastrophic failure. That car was not going to get going. It was in a racing line. There should have been something thrown immediately. And I felt like for that personally, that's why the VSC is there. They should have thrown a VSC immediately in that instance and kind of slowed the field down because he was in kind of a firing line position at that point. And it's not like the FIA can't see what's wrong with his car. They can see telemetry. So there really isn't like an excuse there, in my opinion. And it was like, well, why do we even have the VSC then? And if you were to look at similar situations in any series, if you are in the firing line at that point and cannot get moved or going, it's going to be yellow the whole course because there has to be assistance and the driver has to get out on track. And so I felt like that situation, they really kind of dropped the ball and it took forever to throw the yellows. And even if they implemented slow zones, like at Circuit de la Sarthe for 24 Hour of Le Mans, for anybody not familiar, that track is so large they can't throw a full course caution, full course yellow because of how big the track is sometimes. They'll do slow zones. And it'll be from this set of flags to this set of flags in this specific sector. It'd be like sector 5 is a slow zone, which means I'm under full procedures of like a safety car, like a VSC, because of a stricken car or an issue. And I feel like something like that, if they don't want to throw something that neutralizes the whole field, they could easily implement something like that because they already do it in one of their other FIA governed series. But from my standpoint, China was a huge miss, especially because weren't their cars going by at speed while Valtteri was standing by his car? Like I felt like that was a huge opportunity that was missed from a safety standpoint and would want to see that corrected.
No, I agree, and thanks for bringing in that comparison to other series. And
Yeah.
like I listened to Off Track with Hinch and Rossi,
Yes.
and they talked last
Yes.
season a bit. I love the podcast, and they talked about because they don't have virtual safety car in IndyCar, that race control
Mhm.
tries to be smart about not like interfering,
Yes.
I suppose, with the race by timing
Yes.
the caution so that you're not going to advantage or disadvantage anyone and destroy their race.
Yes.
Um, and but
Yes,
when you
but
have
then
yeah, go on, sorry.
yeah, I was gonna say on the flip side of that though, that is a series that will not hesitate
No,
if there is a big problem though.
yeah.
That's a series that will do every effort to not interfere like Hinch and Rossi were saying. They'll actually time it so cars can get to the pits, it doesn't screw anybody over. They'll time it, they'll keep an eye on it accordingly. They'll make every effort to finish the race not under like a safety car or a full course yellow. But the moment that an incident happens, that it's very clear that assistance is needed, there is zero hesitation. The safety team is to the car sometimes before like the car has stopped moving in an incident. And they do not hesitate to throw the yellow flag in emergent situations where it is like a yeah, we need to do this. And that's kind of the flip side is they'll do that, but they do it in a way and the culture around it that there still is no question or hesitation, if that makes sense. Like if it's very clear that this is non-emergent, they'll kind of wait, like Hinch and Rossi were saying. But that's a series that's a great contrast that you brought up that they will throw it, no questions asked. And just if it bunches the field up, it does, and that's what it is.
Yeah, and as you said earlier, Formula One has the option of the virtual safety car, so there's essentially no excuse. So during the comparison, interestingly, the final S is S for Stroll because we can't let the Chinese Grand Prix fade into obscurity and into the past without describing what he happened to do at the end of the back straight. The comparison with IndyCar is that Pato O'Ward did the same thing to his teammate
Mhm.
about 7, 8 hours later, and then immediately apologized. So Stroll was
Yeah.
slightly less apologetic and was unhappy that he
Mhm.
received the penalty. What's your view on if you saw it, the Stroll incident,
Yes,
whether
I
he was to
did.
blame? Yeah,
So I think that there's a lot like this isn't like I'm not taking sides, but I think that there's a lot of stuff to understand. And I think that Pato was kind of right in being like, yo, that was my bad. And the field bunched up and I screwed up. And I think that that's kind of where Lance maybe could see it a little bit better. I call that checking up. That's kind of the American version of that when the field will kind of slow up like that because somebody in front of them slows down. It's kind of like on the freeway when all the cars hit the brakes in front of you. That's like we call it checking up in NASCAR. It happens all the time. You get into the car in front of you and you wind up kind of hitting them and denting their car or spinning them out and it sucks and it's what happens. And sometimes it's unavoidable. And if you get hit from behind and you're just in the chain reaction, it can happen. But I think seeing the onboard, what Lance was doing, and this is kind of one of those, it's just in how drivers think. He likely wasn't anticipating the checkup happening of all the cars in front of him because he was looking at the apex. He had already switched his focus because he knew his spacing to Daniel. And so he's already focusing on the exit of that turn, knowing that this is going to be where I need to go now and watch his placement there. His visual reference already changed. And so he didn't even see that. So that is a little bit of a like it's on him. He was not anticipating, I think is the word that he used. And that's kind of just how drivers often operate. They're looking beyond the car in front of them. They're often not even looking at the car in front of them. They're looking at a different visual marker. And I think that's kind of the key of what happened. And yes, it's on Lance because he did that, but it just is kind of when you understand that's how drivers operate and then that this checking up and everything can happen. It was kind of bound to happen. I'm surprised we haven't seen it sooner on a Formula One restart. It definitely was partially on Lance, but I think it was also like the field checking up. It's on whoever started the checkup is kind of a byproduct of them slowing up, which I actually think Max said that was his fault. Um, that he kind of accidentally did that, and it's just kind of a byproduct of his safety car games. But it's one of those things that I thought it was ironic the duality of what happened and Pato to say that that was my bad and it was the same situation where just everything checked up and he got into Alex because his visual reference likely changed and wasn't anticipating it. So it sucks, and I think that there is a rightness to the rage, and I do think that maybe you should talk it out a little bit, but I think when I understanding that, I'm like, "Yeah, that was bound to happen," knowing that that's why Lance likely wasn't looking directly at Daniel when Daniel's like, he was looking in his mirrors or looking at the apex and was really upset. That's just that's normal, and it can happen, and it just kinda sucks, and that's where the lack of anticipation came from. So I agree that probably worth the penalty because he should have been paying attention to Daniel. I get why his visual would have changed and he took his attention off of the car, but I think it was justified. I mean, that's pretty blatant. I don't like other series don't penalize for that, but when it comes to something like that where it's race ruining, I think it was justified and fair.
For me, it was reminiscent of a kind of 90s computer game where their AI cars can stop immediately, and then you're like, "Oh, well, that's
Yeah.
not gonna happen for me." I was just looking because you mentioned about whether like, it happening before. I remember, the 2020 Grand Prix at Mugello, which is obviously not a
Yeah.
common Formula 1 circuit. It happened on the main straight, and again, that
No.
was checking up or concertinaing where drivers were getting on it,
Yep.
then getting out of it, and someone got caught out at the back, so
Yep. Yeah, it, almost actually reminded me of, was it Azerbaijan 2018, with the 2 Red Bulls,
Hmm.
with Max and Daniel, infamously, where, I think Max got up under him or he got up under Max, and it ended both of their races.
Yeah, yeah, that was, I think it was Ricardo trying to overtake Max, and possibly that was the
Yes, yes,
moment
yes.
where Danny was like, I need to leave," because I think he felt Max was
Yeah,
to blame.
that's
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, that's it was, like, giving me very much, like, those vibes again, and I was like, "Oh, this looks familiar. I've seen this song before." The Taylor Swift quote, "And I don't like the ending," or whatever it is.
Look, we got some singing as well for free. Amazing, amazing, amazing. Well, as we sort of come towards the end of what's been a fantastic conversation, we have a couple more questions. They're a lot shorter. So one of them, it's a game we like to play with our guests called Taxi Dinner Avoid. So essentially, you have to pick one driver that you want to drive you to dinner because they are the best driver. You want a driver to have dinner with because you think they're the most fascinating personality, and then and this tests your diplomacy, or you end up being quite direct. The driver that you would like to avoid because perhaps you think they are not the character you would like to mix with. So taxi dinner avoid. Normally we sort of say
Okay.
the F1 grid, but do you know what? I'm going to be lenient and say anyone from any motorsport taxi trip dinner.
Oh my gosh, that's so many
No,
that's
well,
so
no
many
pressure. I
drivers.
mean, it doesn't have to be
Okay,
perfect. Come on, engineer. It can be
okay.
suboptimal. You know.
It's like you know me, I'm such a perfectionist. Okay, Taxi, best driver. I think Taxi would be ooh, I think Max would be my taxi driver. I mean, obviously, he's the best, and I just get the vibes that he'd have, like, a killer playlist, even though as the passenger, like, I technically get aux cords rights. I feel like he would have a fantastic vibe going on that dinner ride, and the music would be fantastic. So, I will say Max. Um, Dinner, I'm gonna try and actually stick to the F1 grid because this gets really involved when I start running down the IMSA grid and some of the other grids. My 2 dinner, I'm gonna give you 2. I'll give you an F1 and a non-F1. Pierre Gasly from the F1 grid, I think he is so fascinating, and, like, he's somebody that I just wanna, like, get to know a little more because we see, like, his PR personality and all of that, but I think, like, he's somebody that really fascinates me. Like, he's a math prodigy, I didn't know this, so I think that he would be really cool to have dinner with, and then my non-F1 dinner would be Kamui Kobayashi, who is the team principal of Toyota Gazoo Racing in WEC. He's the head of Toyota Racing, and he also is like one of the greatest of all time sports car and endurance drivers, also former Formula One driver. I think that he is just a really interesting person. He's got a huge interest in coffee. He has a coffee line, and he actually has this like zero emissions coffee trailer he brings to races in Japan with his own beans for the paddock. So I think that he would be really cool to talk to and kind of learn about kind of not only the racing side, but then getting involved in the business side like he has to then become the head of kind of Toyota Racing, and kind of oversee all of that on top of being a very decorated and very successful race car driver and avoid. Hmm. I'm actually gonna say Daniel Ricciardo, and this is rooted in the fact that he almost ran me over on a scooter in Austin, Texas. So I'm gonna say avoid.
Yeah, that's a good answer. And you didn't impugn his character. And it was kind of like a legit reason to avoid someone. You managed to
Yeah,
avoid him, right?
there's a legit reason there. I'm somebody that you if you haven't gotten this vibe, you have to give me like a legitimate reason to not like you. And so that's I'm like he like just that I'm like, you know what, we're gonna avoid the side eye we were given when this happened was like, all right, we're good. All right. So legit there's a legitimate reason there at least.
Can you imagine that he, crashes into you, has an injury, and can't race? Like that would be, I don't know, you'd be part of major news. So, not saying you're less
So
valuable
funny,
than him.
this is
You know.
yeah, this is a funny story actually, speaking of, like, Daniel Ricciardo being hurt, it's
Mm.
not funny, but when he was out with his wrist last year, I actually got hurt so badly at the US Grand Prix, I got to visit the medical center, and in an effort to try and be like, "You're in good hands," they kept trying to tell me without violating HIPAA laws that, they had seen, like they're obviously checking drivers and medically clearing drivers, so like, "Oh, yeah, the grid's been in and out of here, medically clearing them," and I was, like, sitting there and I put 2 and 2 together myself. I'm like, "So basically Daniel Ricciardo was in here, and now I don't think I trust any of you." But it was like they were just like, "Yeah, we've had drivers in here and all of that and, like, getting checked out and making sure they're clear for the weekend," and just trying to, like, comfort me because we think that my ankle is broken, basically. And I'm like, "You're not helping."
Oh dear. And was your ankle broken? More to the point.
No, oh my gosh, thank goodness it was not. I was on crutches for the rest of the weekend, which kind of sucked, but it was really, really still fun. I had a great time and I was taken very well care of by the Red Bull team who I was there with, and then Aston Martin after I did get hurt. And then even like I was at like one of the parties on crutches, like nothing was stopping me that weekend. So
Wow.
not broken, badly sprained, but it was, like, really funny that they were like, "Yeah, we've saw the drivers," and I'm like, "You're not helping me," as they're X-raying my ankle, and the critical care nurse has come over from the helicopter, and he's like, "Yeah, I wanna see this." And when somebody does that, usually you know that it's gonna be bad. And I was like, "Oh no, like it's gonna be broken. I'm gonna need surgery. Like they're gonna have to fly me out of here. Like it's bad. Like something's bad." And luckily it wasn't. But there was a fun little side quest to see the F1 Medical Center. But yeah, luckily not broken.
Wow. I mean, two observations. One, I think fate is trying to connect you and Daniel Ricciardo. I just have that feeling. Right? Two, how did I bury the lead in this interview that it's an hour in and you're talking about medical helicopters and X-rays and being at Aston Martin and Red Bull parties? Like, what the hell? Like, there's a whole other episode in that. Incredible, incredible.
Oh my gosh.
Well,
That's I don't even know. That was wild. That's I made a little video about getting to see the medical center. Wasn't on my bingo card. Very, very interesting though from a like what would happen if you were here kind of thing.
no, well, that is a good segue to for you to tell our listeners where they can find you, where they can keep in touch across all of the different
Sure.
ventures you have. So, yeah, where can we find you?
Okay, so you can find me, like we mentioned, on TikTok, where I am a bunch of red flags, all one word. And that is like my tech talks, where I break down kind of like the upgrades and some of the tech about Formula One and all the other cars. And then I have two podcasts, which are Engines, EVs, and Espresso, and Breaking Bias with friend of the pod, Dr. Obbs. And those are under I think it's Breaking Bias Pod and E Cubed Pod on all platforms. And then you can find me on Twitter. I do a lot of threads on Twitter usually, or I'll tweet out observations, which is my first name, Molly, the letter M_O. And then I think I'm on Instagram. I don't even know, but I have a link that has kind of all my master links. So if you find me on any of those platforms, you can find me on the rest of them. Basically, those are kind of the like big ones where I'm the most active, I would say, with kind of tech content and keeping in touch. I'm on LinkedIn if that's your jam. Like you said, you research on LinkedIn. So I'm out there too. So I'm pretty easy to find. Just punch me in. But those are kind of the main spots you can find me.
Brilliant. Well, it's been a pleasure. And we can't let any guest go without asking the most fundamental life question. Are you ready?
Sure.
Do you know what to expect? Like, maybe you don't. I don't know. Like,
No, I don't.
okay. All right. So, Do you like the occasional pizza?
Yes.
Okay, that wasn't the question. That was the setup. It's fine.
Okay.
Okay, so yes
I
or
have a
no?
feeling I know where this is going.
Right. Pineapple on pizza, yes or no?
Yes.
Oh, gosh. How are you so affirmative on that?
Aha, Blag.
Unbelievable.
Aha, that's
Ah, you're on Team
I love a
Georgie.
good pineapple on pizza.
Uh, but can you? I'm going to ask you to justify that. You know, would you choose it if you were in a pizza place? Would you go and buy
Yes.
pineapple on pizza, or would you?
Absolutely, yes. That's if it's an option and it sounds good and I'm in the mood for a little bit of, like, sweet and spicy and, like, salty and get kind of all of the flavors going, absolutely.
I think you've been paid by Georgie to say this because this just doesn't. I don't know. It feels too enthusiastic about pineapples, but fine,
I love pineapple on pizza. One of my go-to pizza orders has pineapple on it.
amazing. Okay, well, look. All jokes aside, it's been a real pleasure to have you on the show, and thank you for your like infectious energy. It's like 9:08 here in the UK, and I'm now like fully awake and excited. So thank you very much.
Oh my gosh. Thank you guys for having me so much too. This was such a blast. We should do like stripping the dipping, breaking bias, E cubed, whatever crossover.
I can see a kind of quiz coming up, right? We need a quiz master, but I can see that. Although it can't be about engineering because you would beat us. It has to be something, you know, mediocre, and I'd fancy my chances. Well, look,
I
guys.
love a good bar trivia and like pub trivia, so I'm totally
Ah,
down.
now see, I picked the wrong person here, but no. Okay, it would be our pleasure, guys. If you've gotten this far into the episode, wherever you're listening or watching, give us a 5-star review, a thumbs up, and give us a comment. Find us at Strip the Dip on all of your social medias. Until next time, I've been your host F1 Blag. Good night. Thank you very much.